Here's what nobody tells you about Bitcoin ETFs and retirement accounts. You think you're being smart, tax sheltered, diversified, but there's a set of hidden risks that could cost you 30, 40, maybe 50% of your position over the next decade, and most investors won't see it coming until it's too late. Today, you're getting the full breakdown. Counterparty risk, custody risk, fee drag, taxable events, estate planning. By the end, you'll know exactly how to split your stack between self-custody and ETF wrappers based on your age, your tech comfort, and the size of your capital. This isn't theory. This is the calculation you should have done before your first purchase. Counterparty risk. It's the fear that keeps experienced holders awake at night, and it's the risk that new ETF buyers don't even know exists. When you hold Bitcoin in an ETF, you don't own Bitcoin. You own a claim on Bitcoin held by a custodian, managed by an issuer, traded through a brokerage, inside a retirement structure regulated by entities that have changed the rules before and will change them again. Every single one of those layers is a counterparty. Everyone can fail, freeze, or restrict your access. Most people hear this and think it's unlikely. BlackRock isn't going bankrupt. Coinbase custody is secure, and you're probably right, in normal times. But Bitcoin isn't built for normal times. It's built for the moment when normal breaks. Imagine a sovereign debt crisis, a banking freeze, a regulatory emergency. Suddenly your IRA is locked pending review. Your ETF is halted for national security reasons. Meanwhile, the price is moving. The world is changing. And your Bitcoin, the asset you bought specifically because it works when everything else doesn't, is completely inaccessible. So, what does this mean for your allocation? Simple. If you believe Bitcoin is insurance against system failure, then holding 100% in a system-dependent wrapper is incoherent. You need a percentage in self-custody, not because you're paranoid, because you understand what insurance actually means. Now let's flip this, because self-custody has its own risk, and pretending it doesn't is how people lose everything. Custody risk is the risk that you, the holder, screw it up. You lose your seed phrase, you send to the wrong address, you get phished, you die without a recovery plan. These aren't edge cases. These are the most common ways Bitcoin gets lost permanently. And unlike ETF risk, there's no customer service number. There's no insurance. There's no undo button. Here's the calculation most people miss. ETF custody is lower risk for user error, higher risk for systemic failure. Self-custody is higher risk for user error, lower risk for systemic failure. The question isn't which is safer. The question is which failure mode matches your actual threat model. If you're 55 or older, not particularly technical, and your Bitcoin position is less than 10% of your net worth, an ETF in a Roth IRA might be the right move. You get tax-free growth, no custody headaches, and if the system stays stable, you win. But if you're 40, technically comfortable, and Bitcoin is 20, 30, 40% of your wealth, you cannot afford to have all of that behind counterparties. You need redundancy. You need a cold wallet. You need a recovery plan that doesn't depend on institutions behaving the way they're supposed to. The smartest holders don't pick one or the other. They split based on the scenario they're hedging. Here's the thing nobody talks about until it's too late. Fees. Bitcoin ETFs charge management fees. 0.15% to 0.25% per year for most major ones, though some are higher. Doesn't sound like much, but compounded over 20, 30 years inside a retirement account you're not supposed to touch, that fee becomes a wealth transfer you never agreed to. Let's do the math. Say you put $100,000 into a Bitcoin ETF at 0.25% annual fees. Bitcoin goes up 20 times over 20 years, assuming a hypothetical strong growth scenario. Keep in mind, markets can change rapidly. Your position is now worth $2 million, except that 0.25% fee wasn't charged on your $100,000. It was charged on your growing balance every single year. By year 20, you've paid tens of thousands in fees you didn't even notice because it was automatically deducted from your shares. Compare that to self-custody. You pay a one-time hardware wallet cost, maybe $150. That's it. No annual drag, no compounding leak. Your Bitcoin is your Bitcoin forever. Is the convenience of an ETF worth 0.25% of your entire stack every year forever? For some people, yes. If you're managing a large portfolio and Bitcoin is just one piece, the ETF makes sense. The tax wrapper, the liquidity, the ease of estate transfer, it's worth the cost. But if Bitcoin is your long-term wealth preservation play, if you're holding for 10, 20, 30 years and never selling, then paying someone else to hold it for you is a leak you don't need. Now here's where it gets tricky. Taxable events. If you hold Bitcoin in a taxable brokerage account as an ETF, every time you sell, you trigger capital gains. With self-custody, you also trigger taxes when you sell. The difference is control. With self-custody, you decide when, if ever, you sell. You can hold through every cycle, borrow against it, and never create a taxable event. But if your ETF is inside a Roth IRA, this changes everything. You pay no taxes on gains, ever. When you withdraw after 59.5, it's all tax-free. That's a huge advantage, one that self-custody can't match. Here's the framework. If you're using a Roth or a traditional IRA, the ETF makes sense for tax optimization. But if you're holding in a taxable account, self-custody gives you more control. You're not tempted to trade, and you can structure your exit if you ever take one on your terms. Now, estate planning. This is where most people get it completely wrong. ETF advantage. When you die, your IRA passes to your beneficiaries through a custodian. It's clean. It's documented. Your heirs don't need to know anything about Bitcoin, but here's the problem. If that ETF is inside a traditional IRA, your heirs pay income tax on every dollar they withdraw. And they have to withdraw it all within 10 years. Self-custody with proper planning is different. You set up a multi-signature wallet, a clear inheritance protocol, and a letter of instruction. Your heirs get the Bitcoin, and because of the step-up in basis, they pay zero capital gains on everything that appreciated during your lifetime. If they never sell, they never pay taxes. That's generational wealth, preserved. But if you don't set up that inheritance plan, if you die with a hardware wallet and no instructions, your Bitcoin is gone. Forever. So the move is this. If you're holding Bitcoin in self-custody for the long term, treat estate planning like a non-negotiable. And if that sounds too complicated, keep a portion in an ETF inside a Roth, so at least part of your stack passes cleanly, tax-free, with zero chance of loss. So now you have the trade-offs. The question is, what do you actually do? Here's the formula. 3 variables. Your age, your technical comfort, and the size of your Bitcoin position relative to your net worth. If you're under 45, technically comfortable, and Bitcoin is more than 15% of your net worth, you need at least 50% in self-custody. Probably more. You have decades to ride out volatility, the skill to manage a hardware wallet, and enough at stake that counterparty risk is real. If you're 50 to 60, moderately technical, and Bitcoin is 5 to 15% of your wealth, consider a 50-50 split. Half in a Roth IRA for tax-free growth and clean estate transfer. Half in self-custody for sovereignty and insurance. If you're over 60, not technical, and Bitcoin is less than 10% of your portfolio, an ETF and a Roth might be your best play. You get exposure, tax optimization, and zero custody risk. But here's the key. This isn't static. You reevaluate every year. As you age, as your conviction changes, as your technical skills improve, you shift the ratio. The worst thing you can do is pick one and never think about it again. So here's what you know now. Bitcoin ETFs are not a scam, and self-custody is not reckless. They're tools. And like any tool, you pick the right one for the job. You know the trade-offs? Counterparty risk versus custody risk. Fee drag versus tax optimization. Liquidity versus sovereignty. Estate simplicity versus generational control. And you know that the answer isn't one or the other. It's both, in the ratio that matches your age, your skill, and your conviction. Most investors never calculate this. They pick ETF because it's easy, or self-custody because it sounds pure, and they never ask if it actually fits their life. You're different. You're thinking in scenarios. You're planning for the world where everything works and the world where nothing does. So take the next step. Look at your current allocation. Ask yourself, does this actually match my risk tolerance, my technical ability, and my time horizon? And if it doesn't, fix it. Not someday, this month. Because Bitcoin rewards the prepared, and now you're prepared. If this helped you see the trade-offs clearly, subscribe. Every week, we break down the strategies that sophisticated holders use but most investors never hear about. No hype, no panic. Just the math, the risks, and the decisions that actually matter.